If I die, I will kill you. No, wait, if I live, I will kill you.
Welcome back to Sika and welcome to the Ministry of Propaganda. Today we're going to be having a little bit of a debate or an over and back just about the kind of raw argument. What is raw? Why lifting a certain piece of equipment might be easier, why it might be more beneficial or less beneficial to your training, and then why those pieces of equipment are kind of useful or how they actually work in general.
So when we talk about equipment or gear, we're not talking about performance enhancing hormones, we're talking about...
Oh, are we not?
No. Knee sleeves, knee wraps, belts, any kind of lumbar support like that. Elbow sleeves. We're not really talking about squat suits, obviously, because that's not real lifting. We would never be talking about the use of squat suits or any kind of bench shirts or anything like that, because it's completely pointless. Really what we're talking about is commonly used pieces of equipment that we'd normally see in a gym or in weightlifting or in S&C performance environments. So knee sleeves, knee wraps and belts are the main ones realistically we'll see in the gym. Who would we usually have with that? So would it be, we have our weightlifters who can wear that in competition. We have our powerlifters who have varying degrees of what they can wear in the gym. As I'm sure a lot of you know, if you're involved in powerlifting, you know there's a variety of different world records that people have in a multitude of different federations, and there's a variety of different ways of what people define as raw. Some people will call raw with wraps, raw without wraps, but raw without wraps can still have knee sleeves. There'll be, a certain length of knee sleeves you'll have on. There's even certain stipulations about how you can put on your own knee sleeves. So certain federations, I think it's the IPF, if you need assistance to put on your knee sleeves, you can't wear them. I'm not sure even how that's policed. Formerly in weightlifting, there used to be, you couldn't have two different kinds of material or two different forms of knee support. So you couldn't wrap your knees with a knee sleeve or wrap your knees with knee wraps and then put on a knee sleeve over that. I know a lifter who got caught doing that before, which is funny. All that is done away with now. There's essentially there's no limit to the amount of knee wrap, or there used to be a limit on the length and the thickness of wrapping you could use. It was very large, like you would never get it. All that has been done away with now. So basically what we're left with is like knee sleeves, knee wraps, and then we'll go with the generally kind of accepted term, I suppose, of the IPF in terms of, what raw would be. So in terms of they use knee sleeves, don't they?
Knee sleeves and a belt you're allowed, yeah.
Yeah. And then of course we've powerlifters, but we do see a lot of you do see surprising amount of athletes use knee wraps in squatting, and it's sometimes you'll see an environment where one of them will discover how productive knee wraps can be for your squat, but it is a little bit misguided in certain senses of what they're trying to get from their squat when they do use that knee wrap, and they might not be getting the benefit, and they might not be the person who should be using shmeesh wraps.
So in terms of then what like the piece of equipment is offering you, right? If it's a belt, if it's knee wraps, there's 3 or 4 different ways in which these pieces of equipment work, or they help you out, or they allow you to lift more weights. The first way is through proprioception or increased proprioceptive awareness. What this is basically allowing us to do is imagine you have your knee sleeve on. As you sit down into the squat, you don't just get the kind of awareness of where you are in terms of depth perception with the ground or depth perception with an object around you. You don't just get it by kind of feeling the lengthening of your muscles, which is what most of us would have. You don't get it through kind of bones stacking on top of bones, where you might have that constriction at the front of your ankle, where your ankle joint is closing in and you feel that closing in and you kind of understand you're getting closer to the bottom of the squat. All these things are commonly referred to as kind of muscle memory. What a piece of equipment like a knee sleeve or knee wrap does is the tightening of that knee sleeve or the tightening of that knee wrap. The more tight we get that, we understand we've gone deeper and deeper into the squat, and then we'll have a kind of memory, or we'll have an understanding that when it gets to this amount of tightness, I'm probably below parallel. You get this kind of increased proprioception with the same thing with a belt. As you breathe out into a belt and you brace against a belt, a lot of the time, instead of people just going through a system of bracing, if they're very commonly, or if they're regularly using a belt, they'll brace against it until they feel a certain amount of tension against the belt, and then they understand they're braced. So rather than them having a system of bracing where they contract one piece of muscle as strong as the other, they might breathe in, then they might drop their diaphragm, then contract again and understand that they're braced. Instead, they're pushing out against the belt, and once they feel that certain level of tension with the belt, they understand through proprioception where their kind of bracing is, where those muscle tissues are, and it allows them to squat better. The next piece then is tension, right? So tension is very common in terms of like the geared powerlifting world, where we have the bench suits, we have the squat suits, the pulling suits. And if you imagine you're looking at like our little stick man here, what tension would refer to is the stretching of a piece of material over a joint, and that stretching is basically building up a small amount of potential energy. We're converting that kinetic energy we have from the way down, or kinetic energy from the movement of our body or the movement of the barbell. We're converting that into some sort of elastic or potential or stored energy. And then as we stand up, or as we press, or as we start to pull the barbell off the floor, that release of that elastic energy, the release of the potential energy back into kinetic energy, results in us being able to lift more weights. This is why you commonly see things like the length of a knee sleeve being pleated. So obviously if we had a knee sleeve that went the whole way from our crotch down to our ankle, we have a lot of material there. We have a lot of material we can apply tension to. And then if we imagine we're loading the front side of that material as we bend the knee, we have a lot of stored potential energy there, and we have the ability to squat more weight by using it. The next thing we have is compression. So very common thing for compression is obviously wearing a belt. We're squeezing the muscle against something, so we're manipulating our diaphragm, manipulating our anterior and posterior core muscle, pushing out against something, and it allows us to develop more tension by compressing those muscle tissues. It's the same way with knee wraps. Obviously we can compress a knee wrap an awful lot more than we can compress a knee sleeve. And what it allows us to do is ensure all those muscle fibers are pointing and running in the same direction. As we apply tension, so as we contract the muscle, that contraction is going to cause more force in a given direction, which is more beneficial. Also, there's benefits, or certain benefits, to contraction of a tendon under an acute load, which will allow that tendon to produce more force or transfer more force onto the bones. Compression, interestingly, is probably one of the negative side effects of using a piece of equipment such as this during training, because that compression is going to lead to a certain need for compression in the future, or a certain lacking in our ability to contract voluntarily, or even just learn how to do a movement without that compression in the future. The next one then is stacking or mechanical advantage. So in the case of our stickman, once again, if we're wearing something like a knee sleeve, we get a certain stacking of neoprene or elastic material or whatever it is behind the knee. That stacking does two things. So the first thing that stacking does is it could actually change the fulcrum, so change the point at which we're levering our knee. This is only very, very slight amounts, but basically by pushing those tendons in closer and then allowing our femur or our hamstring to stack in on top of our calf, it allows us to have a shortened range of motion. Also, as well as a shortened range of motion, that stacking or that biomechanical or mechanical advantage can store a small amount of energy in it. So not only do we get a kind of elastic reflex from the tension of the material on the front, we get a certain amount of stored energy in the material behind, and in that stacking of hamstring on top of neoprene on top of another layer of neoprene which is over our calf, we can get a fairly serious mechanical advantage from that. As we mentioned at the start of this video, there's to's and fro's, or positives and negatives, to wearing certain pieces of equipment, why you might want to wear them in training or why you might not, and that's what we're going to talk about now.
Probably the best place to start with this might be just to look at what does some of the research say, and there is a extreme lack of research on weightlifting belts, knee wraps and knee sleeves, in terms of when you compare it to other things. Like even if you pick the subject well studied like post-activation potentiation, where there's literally hundreds of studies, you look at nutrition, something as common as knee wraps and knee sleeves and belts aren't really that well studied in the literature. There's very, very few studies that directly relate to what we'd be using them for. So if we look at one, for example, it compares the kinematic and EMG analysis of back squat at different intensities with and without knee wraps. Now, we're not going to go through the whole studies today, but long story short, the conclusion they found was there was a decreased muscle activation in the vastus lateralis at the same intensity. So when they got to 90% of your 1RM with knee sleeves, knee wraps, and then 90% of their 1RM without knee wraps, and they found that there was lower muscular activation of the vastus lateralis, which is quite interesting, and it's kind of what we mentioned about it at the start when I was saying about certain athletes who are doing them who don't wear the knee wraps during their actual sport. So, for example, a powerlifter who would wear the knee wraps at their heaviest squats can wear them in their competition. So it would make sense for them to practice that. Whereas if we had a rugby player, for example, who was squatting with knee wraps, it's possible you'd get more out of that squat if you were wearing those, or if you didn't wear your knee wraps and you're doing that squat, as it'd be a better beneficial squat. You'd use less weight, of course, but there'd be an argument that you're getting better force activation, better activation, and better kind of more productive work done on the muscles you're looking to do when you're doing a high bar back squat, for example, for people like rugby players. So that extra weight being done with the knee wraps may actually not be productive and maybe somewhat counterintuitive. Another study in 2012, and I kind of remember when this one came out, it was wearing knee wraps affects mechanical output and performance characteristics of back squat exercise. Long story short, they say that I'm not convinced by what they're saying, but I'll read it out for you. The elastic properties of knee wraps increase mechanical output but altered back squat technique in a way that is likely to alter the muscular target by the exercise and possibly compromise the integrity of the knee joint, which in terms of the muscularity targeted would actually agree with the other study which came out later. But then they go on to say knee wraps should not be worn during the strength condition process and perceived weakness in the knee joint should be assessed and treated. So what they're saying is you are potentially causing injury to your knee, or setting up an environment where you will cause injury to your knee with knee wraps, which I'm not really sure there's a lot of good evidence to say that. I think that's quite a bold statement from a group of researchers when there isn't really any evidence to suggest that yet in something that's commonly understudied. So I would take that kind of process with a grain of salt. So if we go on to the last one though, with why, for example, I don't wear knee wraps or knee sleeves during any of my squatting or my weightlifting anymore, even though previously I have done it. This one is neoprene knee sleeves of varying tightness augment barbell squat 1 repetition maximum performance without improving other indices of muscular strength, power or endurance. So long story short again, the knee sleeves improves 1RM back squat, or they provide better mechanical advantages for someone's squat. However, they made no other difference to things like vertical jump or single leg repetition. So if we look at this in terms of, for a weightlifter, for myself, what am I looking to get out of knee sleeves or knee wraps when I am doing weightlifting? I'm looking to improve my lifts as much as possible, so that's the goal of weightlifting. That's why I would be using something like this. I'm not looking to use them to prevent injury or hide injury, which is a maladaptive process. So I'm looking at them in a way, will this positively affect my weightlifting, and could it potentially have some negative effects on my weightlifting? So we've seen some negative arguments from these studies with knee wraps and knee sleeves. So if we look at why would I need them, essentially they're not going to help you in the pull. They're not going to help you in the pull under. There's a likelihood in the pull under they might make you fractionally slower, as they are providing some resistance, as you are not forcefully contracting your knee extensors as you pull under, or your knee flexors as you're getting under the barbell. A lot of this is from the motion of jumping down underneath the barbell, whereas for an example in the squat we can apply more force to get under faster, but even in that scenario it still puts you slightly slower. So there is a possibility that I can make you fractionally slower in weightlifting, and we never ever want to do something that makes us slower in weightlifting. Then if you look at the only position where they're going to help us, for example, is standing up out of the clean or the snatch. And I, for example, in a scenario where I don't need any assistance to stand up without a clean out of snatch, my squat is well in excess of this, and my technique is at a level where I can appropriately use the elastic storage of my lower body joints when I catch a barbell. So the assistance for me, I'm getting no extra benefit from standing up any faster. I wouldn't stand up any faster with or without knee sleeves or knee wraps. So then we're left with that slightly altered knee pattern, slightly shorter range of motion at the bottom of our squat, because obviously they're going to reduce the depth of our squat slightly, which is something you never want to do in weightlifting as well. And then we're going to have a slightly slower pull under speed, or slightly lower speed of our kind of just getting into the squat essentially in the bottom, all of which are negatives. Now, that's not to say I don't think weightlifters should wear them, and I don't think that's not to say weightlifters can't get away wearing them very well, but it's worth looking at yourself in a scenario and say, do I really need these knee sleeves? Do I really need these knee wraps when I'm weightlifting, or can I be a bit more productive without them? Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Can you hear how loud you're breathing?
No.
It's so loud today.
It's not.
It's unbelievably loud. I'd say it's 7 out of 10.
No way.
Yeah.
In my case, why I do wear knee sleeves while back squatting is my setup is almost the complete opposite of Owen's, right? So Gerf is back squatting to get better at the lifts, not necessarily to get a better back squat. Whereas in my case, for the last kind of year, 2 years, 3 years, I've just been trying to get a bigger squat. and I really, really do need to get a bigger squat. The second thing is my proportions, my morphology dictates that I will naturally have an inclined torso, and I'll naturally shoot my ass back and shoot my hips back as I stand back up. So I've relatively weak legs in comparison to my posterior chain. What knee sleeves allow me to do is squat with that kind of technique that I want to do. It allows me to develop leg strength through doing the high bar back squat, and then it allows me to transfer that leg strength better into weightlifting or all the other endeavors that I like to do. So in my case, when I wear knee sleeves, it allows me to train a certain modality I want to train, it allows me to have a technique I want to have, and it allows me to keep pushing up the weights and chasing weights as I go through. Now, if I had a long time and I wanted to really focus on it, I probably could put a lot more effort in and just force myself to squat with my knees going forward, load up my quads a lot more, train a lot more, put a lot more volume into training, and I'd certainly be able to achieve those positions. But in my case, the knee sleeves are very beneficial. On the opposite side of that, I very rarely wear a belt, or very rarely kind of have to wear a belt, due to the fact that my torso is very short in compared to my legs. I look like some kind of weird thing from Monsters Inc. But my back strength is almost never a limiting factor. So kind of max deadlifts are almost identical with and without a belt. Obviously, I still wear a belt if I'm going to max out because it's beneficial, allow me to do slightly more. But in my case, a belt isn't kind of as necessary as it would be for somebody who had kind of more equal leg to torso or shorter leg to torso ratios.
Usually what we'd recommend is, if you do wear them, is try and do a period of training without them. So obviously see the limited evidence suggests there might be some negative effects to it. It might alter patterns, might alter muscular activation. There is also a psychological aspect to them as well, where people get very reliant on them, and it does give you a sense of kind of enhanced confidence if you spend some of your training without wearing your knee wraps and your belts for a certain period of time. Anecdotally, we do see with our athletes that people who go longer without wearing them and then add them in after do seem to be a little bit more productive in their training cycles. So, for example, if you're running the Rotating Your Back Squat program, a lot of people will spend the first 2 or 3 weeks without wearing any knee sleeves or belts or knee wraps, and then add them in the last couple of weeks. For example, though, if you start with them, you can only progress with them. You can never take them off as the weeks go on, as it's very maladaptive. It's a different learning process. It alters your coordination. It might alter your ability to voluntarily activate certain muscles. A variety of reasons why you can't really take them off once you've put them on, once you get used to that particular squatting pattern wearing them. So you can certainly benefit from not wearing them for a period of time and then finishing out strong with them. So we do see some benefits to that. It's obviously very hard to compare. It's very hard to get certain numbers. So it'd be nice to see some kind of longer term studies with that, but it's unlikely we'll ever see them realistically. So anecdotally, I suppose you'll have to take from us, from seeing a lot of different athletes, there is benefit in training without them for a period of time, but then adding them in the end when you need them is very useful. So the main thing as well then, I think, if you are an athlete who doesn't wear them on the field or in your sport, it's well worth your while just sitting down for a minute and thinking, do I need to wear these? Is it productive for me to wear these during S&C? Or just because I can do more weight, is that what I need? Or will I have better quality with lighter stuff? Or lighter weights but with better quality movement and a little bit more range of motion and a little bit more volunteer activation from your own muscles. So it's possible, it's worth thinking about. Now you might be in a scenario where, look, these 5mm neoprene knee sleeves aren't really giving me that much and it just helps to squat a little bit, so I'm getting more out of it, which is totally fine. But I would say just sit down for a minute and just really think it over, or talk to your S&C coach and have to see what they say.
The last bit, and to conclude on this, the thing we really commonly hear is, I just like to wear knee sleeves, these wraps, whatever, because they keep my knees warm, right? So knees being warm and the function of a joint becoming warm, there's a number of things that happen. We get increased synovial fluid around the joint. We also get increased plasticity or increased elasticity of the tendons that are going into that joint. And we also get an increased kind of level of suppleness with the ligaments that are joining the bones to the bones. If you're in the case where wearing knee sleeves takes away knee pain because they keep your knees warm, you're either not sufficiently warmed up, or else something in that muscle tendon unit isn't firing right. So it's very likely, if you're in the case where you do squats and when you don't wear your knee sleeves, you get knee pain because your knees aren't warm. I think firstly you should go and sit on a stationary bike, go on a rowing machine for 15 minutes, actually become warm, get an increased heart rate, get increased blood pressure, get all of these positive effects from having a warm up, and then go and train. And if you're in that case and you've done that, you've actually warmed up sufficiently for 2 or 3 weeks in a row, that pain doesn't go away, then you need to start looking at, do I have some degradation of the tendons? Do I have some tendinopathy kicking off? Look at all these factors and see, is there another issue happening here besides I don't have my Ray-Ban knee sleeves? View, 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 view. Yeah, they just keep my knees warm.
Mm-hmm.
No, they fucking don't, Derek.